I never thought my snow machine would be the reason everything fell apart, but here we are, standing in front of a judge because the HOA president got herself, and 3 others lost in the Alaskan wilderness for 48 hours. My name is Isaac Anderson, and I live in Eagle River, Alaska, about 15 miles northeast of Anchorage. I bought my property here 6 years ago specifically because it backed up to thousands of acres of wilderness trails. The house itself was modest, a 3-bedroom log cabin-style home with a detached garage big enough for all my equipment. What sold me on the place was the trail access. I am an avid outdoorsman, and maintaining those trails became something of a passion project for me. The neighborhood, Birchwood Estates, was one of those planned communities that started popping up in the early 2000s. About 40 homes total, each sitting on 2 to 3 acre lots. Most of the residents were transplants from the lower 48 who wanted the Alaska experience without going completely off-grid. They wanted to see moose from their kitchen windows, but still have garbage pickup and street maintenance. That meant we had a homeowners association, which I did not mind at first. They kept the main roads plowed, organized the occasional neighborhood barbecue, and generally stayed out of everyone's way. That changed about 18 months ago when Margaret Lewis moved into the development. Margaret was a 52-year-old woman from Seattle who had retired early from some tech company with enough money to be comfortable and enough free time to make everyone else miserable. Within 3 months of moving in, she had gotten herself elected as HOA president. The previous president, Tom, had been a laid-back guy who treated the position like the unpaid, mostly ceremonial role it was supposed to be. Margaret treated it like she was running a Fortune 500 company. The first sign of trouble came last winter, in January. I had been maintaining the trail system behind our development for 5 years at that point. These were not official state trails, just old mining roads and game paths that I had gradually improved and marked. I spent probably 10 to 15 hours a week in the winter keeping them packed down and safe. I used my snow machine, a ski-doo expedition, to haul a drag behind me that smoothed out the snow and created a firm base. This made the trails perfect for skiing, snowshoeing, dog sledding, and other snow machines. A lot of my neighbors used these trails. The Johnsons would take their kids cross-country skiing back there most weekends. Pete Richards ran his dog sled team on them. Even some people from outside the development had started using them because I had done such a good job maintaining them. I never asked for money or recognition. I did it because I loved being out there, and I loved that other people got to enjoy the wilderness safely. I typically did my trail maintenance early in the morning, around 6 or 7. I would be out there for 2 or 3 hours, packing trails, clearing any fallen branches, and checking the route markers I had installed. My snow machine was not particularly loud, certainly no louder than the lawn mowers everyone ran in the summer, but sound carries differently in the cold winter air. On January 15th, I got home from a maintenance run around 9 in the morning. I was unhooking my drag from the snow machine when I saw Margaret marching across the snow toward my property. She was wearing a pristine white parka that probably cost more than my snow machine and carrying a clipboard, which should have been my first warning. "Mr. Anderson," she called out, still 20 feet away, "we need to talk about your noise violations." I finished securing my equipment before I turned to face her. "Morning, Margaret. What noise violations?" She consulted her clipboard like she was reading from a legal document. "You have been operating loud machinery before 8 in the morning on multiple occasions. This is in direct violation of our Community Noise Ordinance, Section 7, Paragraph 3. I have been running my snow machine in the mornings for 5 years, I said, keeping my tone neutral. Nobody has ever complained before. Well, I am complaining now, Margaret said, her voice sharp. I moved here for peace and quiet, not to be woken up by your engine at dawn. Furthermore, you are not permitted to operate commercial equipment without prior approval from the HOA board. It is not commercial equipment. It is my personal snow machine. You are using it to maintain trails that people outside our community use. That makes it a commercial activity. She handed me a piece of paper from her clipboard. This is your formal warning. The next violation will result in a fine of $500. I looked at the paper, which was printed on official HOA letterhead with the community logo. Margaret, those trails provide recreation for dozens of people, including a lot of folks in this neighborhood. Kids use them. Families use them. Then perhaps the families should maintain them quietly, she said, or better yet, let the state handle it. These are not state trails. The state is not going to maintain them. Not my problem, Mr. Anderson. The rules are the rules. She turned and walked away before I could respond further. I was frustrated but not particularly worried. I figured Margaret was on some kind of power trip and would calm down once she settled into the neighborhood. I was wrong. 2 weeks later, on February 1st, I was out doing my usual morning maintenance. I made an extra effort to be quiet, keeping my speed down and trying to minimize engine noise. It did not matter. When I got home at 8:30, there was an envelope taped to my front door. Inside was a fine notice for $500, along with a photo of me on my snow machine with a timestamp of 7:15 that morning. I immediately went to see Tom, the former HOA president, at his house. Tom was a retired guy in his 60s who had moved to Alaska from Montana. He actually understood how things worked up here. She cannot do this, right? I asked, showing him the fine notice. Tom read it over and sighed. Technically, there is a noise ordinance in the community bylaws. Nobody has ever enforced it before, but it does exist. So I just have to pay $500 because I was being a good neighbor. You could contest it at the next HOA meeting, Tom suggested. Might be worth a shot. Bring pictures of the trails, testimony from people who use them. Show the community value. The next HOA meeting was not until February 20th, and in the meantime, I faced a choice. I could stop maintaining the trails, which would mean they would become dangerous and eventually unusable, or I could keep doing it and rack up more fines. I decided to keep maintaining them. The trails were too important, and I figured once I made my case at the meeting, the community would back me up. I got fined again on February 8th and February 14th. $1,500 in total now. Each time, Margaret sent the notice with the same formal, cold language and a photo as evidence. She was apparently waking up early just to catch me. The February HOA meeting was held at the community center, a small building near the development entrance that mostly sat empty, except for these monthly gatherings. I showed up with a folder full of photos, a petition signed by 18 families who used the trails, and a genuine hope that reason would prevail. About 30 people were at the meeting, which was a good turnout for our small community. Margaret sat at the front table with 2 other board members, Linda and Robert. Linda was one of Margaret's friends, another transplant who had only lived here a couple years. Robert was a quiet guy who mostly went along with whatever was easiest. Margaret called the meeting to order and went through the usual business: approval of last month's minutes, budget updates, a discussion about the community entrance sign that needed repair. Finally, she got to new business. "We have a request from Mr. Anderson to address his recent fines," Margaret announced. "Mr. Anderson, you have 5 minutes." I stood up and laid out my case. I explained how I had been maintaining the trails for 5 years, how many families used them, and the safety value of keeping them properly maintained. I passed around photos showing kids skiing, the Johnsons' holiday card photo taken on the trails, Pete with his dog team. I presented the petition. These trails are a community resource, I concluded. Yes, my snow machine makes some noise, but it is no worse than any other normal activity, and the benefit to everyone far outweighs any minor inconvenience. Several people spoke up in support. Pete Richards talked about how his dog sledding business depended on having safe training trails nearby. Sandra Johnson thanked me for creating a safe space where her kids could experience the outdoors. Even old Mr. Peterson, who barely left his house, said he liked watching people use the trails from his window. Then Margaret spoke. "I appreciate the testimonials," she said in a tone that suggested she did not appreciate them at all. "But this is not about whether the trails are nice or whether Mr. Anderson means well. This is about rules and fairness. We have a noise ordinance. If we make exceptions for one person, we have to make exceptions for everyone. What is next? Someone wants to run a sawmill at dawn. Someone wants to practice their rock band at 6 in the morning. That is not the same thing," I said. "It absolutely is the same thing," Margaret shot back. "Noise is noise. Rules are rules. If you want to maintain trails, do it during approved hours, 8 in the morning to 8 at night. Problem solved." "That does not work," I said. "In the winter, it is dark until almost 9. I would have to work in the dark, which is dangerous, or I would have to maintain them in the afternoon when people are actually using them. Again, not my problem. You have been fined for legitimate violations. The fines stand, and if you continue to violate the noise ordinance, you will continue to be fined." Linda nodded along with everything Margaret said. Robert looked uncomfortable but stayed quiet. Margaret called for a vote to uphold the fines. It passed 2-1, with only Robert voting against. That was it. The meeting moved on to discussing summer landscaping plans, and I sat there fuming. 18 families had signed my petition. More people had spoken in support. None of it mattered because Margaret had decided I was breaking her rules. I paid the $1,500 in fines because I did not want to risk a lien on my property. And then I made a decision. If the community did not want me maintaining the trails before 8 in the morning, fine. I just would not maintain them at all. It was a petty decision, maybe, but I was angry. I had spent 5 years and countless hours of my own time creating something good for everyone, and this was how it was repaid. So I stopped. No more early morning runs. No more dragging and packing. No more clearing branches or checking route markers. The trails could return to nature for all I cared. The first couple weeks, nobody really noticed. There had been enough traffic on the trails that they stayed somewhat packed down. But then we got a big storm in early March, about 16 inches of fresh powder. Normally, I would have been out there the next morning, packing everything down, making sure the trails were safe and clearly marked. Instead, I stayed home and drank coffee. By mid-March, the trails were a mess. The snow was too deep and unpacked for easy travel. The route markers I had installed were buried or obscured. Branches that had fallen in storms were blocking paths. A couple of people from the neighborhood asked me when I was going to get back out there. I explained about the fines and Margaret's enforcement of the noise ordinance. "That is ridiculous," Sandra Johnson said. "Can you maintain them in the afternoons instead?" "I could, but I am not going to," I told her honestly. I was doing this as a volunteer service, on my own time, with my own equipment and fuel. I got fined $1,500 for my trouble. If the HOA wants the trails maintained, They can hire someone to do it during approved hours. Word spread quickly. More people started complaining to the HOA about the trail conditions. Margaret's response, from what I heard, was that the trails were not HOA property and therefore not HOA responsibility. If people wanted to use them, they could maintain them themselves. The problem was, nobody else had the equipment or expertise to do it properly. A couple people tried snowshoeing out there to pack down paths, but it was not enough. The trails became increasingly dangerous, with hidden obstacles and unstable snow conditions. In late March, I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that Margaret was planning a wilderness experience group hike for early April. She had invited several new residents and some potential buyers who were looking at houses in the development. The idea was to showcase the outdoor recreation opportunities available to residents. She was planning to use my trail system for this little expedition. I found out about it from Pete Richards, who stopped by my place on March 28th. "Did you hear about Margaret's hiking thing?" he asked. "No, what hiking thing?" "She is organizing a group hike on the trails behind the development. Supposed to be this Saturday. She has been advertising it as a guided wilderness experience. Guided by who? She does not know those trails," Pete shrugged. "I am just telling you what I heard." "Thought you should know." I thought about warning Margaret that the trails were not in good condition, that the markers were obscured, and that it was dangerous to take people out there without proper knowledge of the route. Then I remembered the $1,500 in fines and her dismissive attitude at the meeting. If she wanted to play wilderness guide on trails she had prevented me from maintaining, that was her choice. Saturday, April 2nd, was a beautiful day. Clear skies, temperatures in the mid-30s, perfect spring weather. From my back windows, I watched Margaret gather her group at the trailhead around 10 in the morning. There were 7 people total. Margaret, her friend Linda, Robert from the HOA board, and 4 people I did not recognize, probably the potential buyers she had mentioned. They all had matching backpacks, which I figured Margaret had bought specially for the occasion. They were dressed in what I called REI catalog style, brand new outdoor gear that looked expensive but not broken in. Margaret was leading the way with a map, probably just a printout from Google Earth. I watched them disappear into the woods and went about my day. I ran some errands in town, worked on fixing a broken shelf in my garage, made dinner. Around 7 that evening, I was sitting down to watch a hockey game when I heard Snowmachines in the distance. That was not unusual, but these sounded close and frequent, like they were running search patterns. Around 8:30, there was a knock on my door. It was Pete Richards, and behind him I could see flashing lights from emergency vehicles out on the main road. "They are looking for Margaret and her group," Pete said. "They never came back from the hike." My stomach dropped. "What do you mean they never came back?" "They were supposed to be back by 4. When they were not back by 6, one of the husbands called search and rescue. They have been looking for about 2 hours now." I grabbed my coat and headed out to the trailhead. There were 2 Alaska State Trooper vehicles, a fish and game truck, and several volunteers with snow machines. A trooper I recognized, Sergeant Mike Patterson, was coordinating the search. "Isaac," he said when he saw me, "you know these trails better than anyone. We could use your help." I filled him in on the trail conditions, the obscured markers, and the areas where people might get turned around. The main trail splits about 3 miles in. If they missed the markers, they could have headed east instead of looping back. That would take them into some rough country. "Can you show us?" "Yeah, let me get my machine." I spent the next 4 hours searching with the official teams. The temperature was dropping fast, down into the teens, and while the weather was clear, that actually made it colder. I kept thinking about those brand new backpacks I had seen. Did they have proper cold weather gear? Emergency supplies? Fire starting equipment? We found the first sign of them around midnight. Robert had tied a piece of red fabric from his jacket to a tree branch, probably trying to mark their location. We were about 5 miles from the trailhead, in an area that was not even part of my regular trail system. "They are way off course," I told Sergeant Patterson. "If they kept going this direction, they are heading toward the Eagle River Valley. That is a lot of rough terrain." The search continued through the night. They brought in a helicopter at first light, and around 9 on Sunday morning they finally spotted the group. They were about 8 miles from the trailhead, huddled in a small clearing. The helicopter could not land due to the trees, so we had to get to them by Snowmachine. I was part of the team that reached them first. They looked rough. Margaret's expensive white parka was dirty and torn. Linda was crying. Robert was trying to keep everyone calm. The 4 potential buyers looked like they were in shock. Everyone was cold, exhausted, and clearly frightened. "Thank God," Margaret said when she saw us. Then, in classic Margaret fashion, she immediately tried to take control. "These trails are completely unsafe. There are no proper markers, the paths are not maintained. This is unacceptable." I just stared at her. Sergeant Patterson stepped in before I could say something I would regret. "Madam, we need to get you all checked out by medical. We can discuss what happened later." They loaded everyone onto sleds attached to snow machines and we hauled them back to the trailhead. Paramedics were waiting. Nobody was seriously injured, just cold, dehydrated, and exhausted. They all got checked out and released. I figured that would be the end of it. A scary experience, lesson learned. Everyone moves on. But this was Margaret we were talking about. On April 6th, I received a certified letter from a law firm in Anchorage. Margaret and the HOA were suing me for negligence and failing to maintain safe community amenities. They were seeking damages for emotional distress, medical expenses, and punitive damages. Total amount, $75,000. I could not believe what I was reading. I had been fined for maintaining the trails, so I stopped maintaining them, and now I was being sued for not maintaining them. The legal theory seemed to be that, because I had maintained them for years, people had come to rely on them being safe, and my sudden abandonment of this responsibility was negligent. I immediately called a lawyer. His name was Jim Thompson, and he had handled my house closing when I bought the property. After I explained the situation, there was a long silence on the phone. "So they fined you for doing trail maintenance, and now they are suing you for not doing trail maintenance," Jim said slowly. "That is correct. And the trails are not on HOA property, not part of your property, and you were never paid or officially appointed to maintain them. Also correct. I just did it voluntarily. This is the stupidest lawsuit I have seen in 20 years, Jim said. But we still have to respond to it. Forward me everything. The fine notices, photos, that petition you mentioned, everything from the HOA meeting. I will need statements from people who can verify the timeline." Over the next few weeks, Jim built our defense. It was pretty straightforward. I had been maintaining the trails as a volunteer. The HOA had fined me for that activity and made it clear I needed to stop. I stopped. What happened after that was not my responsibility. The trails were not my property, not HOA property, and I had no legal duty to maintain them. Several of my neighbors provided statements supporting me. Pete Richards, the Johnsons, even old Mr. Peterson wrote letters explaining how the HOA had forced me to stop the maintenance. Tom, the former HOA president, provided a particularly detailed statement about how Margaret had changed the culture of the HOA and how the noise ordinance had never been enforced before her tenure. The case went to discovery. which meant both sides had to share evidence. That was when things got interesting. Jim subpoenaed all the HOA records related to me and the trails. What we found was that Margaret had been planning that wilderness hike since mid-March. She had been advertising it to potential home buyers as a key selling point of the community. She had specifically mentioned the maintained trail system in her promotional materials. She knew the trails were not being maintained, Jim told me during a meeting in his office. She knew because multiple people had complained to the HOA about it. There are emails. She ignored them because she wanted to use the trails to sell houses. So she knew they were in bad shape and took people out there anyway. Exactly. That is not your negligence. That is her negligence. In fact, I think we might have grounds for a countersuit. We filed a countersuit in early May, alleging harassment, abuse of HOA authority, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. We also filed a complaint with the State of Alaska Department of Commerce regarding Margaret's conduct as HOA president. The legal process moved slowly, as these things do, but the court of public opinion moved fast. Word spread through Eagle River about what had happened. The local newspaper, the Eagle River Star, ran a story with the headline, "HOA President Sues Volunteer Trail Maintainer After Getting Lost on Unmaintained Trails." It made Margaret look exactly as foolish as you would expect. The publicity was not good for Birchwood Estates. Two of the potential buyers who had been on that disastrous hike left detailed negative reviews online about the community and the HOA. Property values started to slip. People who had been considering buying in the development looked elsewhere. A group of homeowners, led by Tom and Pete, started a petition to recall Margaret as HOA president. They needed signatures from 2/3 of the homeowners, which was 27 out of 40 homes. They got 32 signatures in less than a week. Margaret fought the recall, claiming it was not being done according to proper procedures. She cited various technicalities in the HOA bylaws. It bought her some time, but the writing was on the wall. Nobody wanted her in charge anymore. In June, both lawsuits were still grinding through the system. Jim was confident we would win, but he warned me that even winning could take months and cost a lot in legal fees. The good news is, if we win, we can pursue recovery of legal costs from the HOA, he said. The bad news is that HOA is all your neighbors. You would essentially be taking money from them. Margaret made this decision, not them, I pointed out. True, but legally, the HOA is a collective entity. Any judgment comes from HOA funds, which means everyone's dues. It was a frustrating situation. I was probably going to win, but the victory would come at a cost to innocent neighbors who had supported me throughout this mess. Then, in early July, something unexpected happened. The State of Alaska Department of Commerce investigation that we had filed turned up some interesting findings. Margaret, it turned out, had been using HOA funds inappropriately. Those matching backpacks for the wilderness hike, purchased with HOA money, not her personal funds. She had also been paying herself a management fee that was not authorized in the HOA budget. Over the course of about 10 months, she had misappropriated around $12,000. The state referred the matter to the Alaska State Troopers for potential criminal prosecution. On July 18th, Sergeant Patterson, the same trooper who had coordinated the search and rescue, showed up at Margaret's house with a warrant for her arrest. She was charged with theft in the second degree, a Class C felony under Alaska law. The arrest was the final straw. The HOA recall went through without any further resistance from Margaret, who had bigger problems to worry about. Linder resigned from the board entirely, not wanting to be associated with the scandal. Tom agreed to serve as interim president until a proper election could be held. One of Tom's first acts was to drop the lawsuit against me. In a community meeting held on July 25th, he formally apologized on behalf of the HOA for the fines and the legal action. Isaac was providing a valuable service to this community, Tom said. Instead of thanking him, we punished him. That was wrong, and I hope we can make it right. The HOA voted to refund my $1,500 in fines and to cover my legal expenses, which had run about $8,000 at that point. They also voted to officially adopt the trail system as a community amenity and to budget money for its proper maintenance. We would like to hire you as a contractor to maintain the trails, Tom told me after the meeting. $5,000 a year, and you can do the work whenever you need to do it. No noise restrictions. It was a fair offer, and I accepted. The money was not much considering the time involved, but it was not really about the money. It was about being respected and appreciated for the work. Margaret's criminal case moved forward through the summer. Her lawyer tried to negotiate a plea deal, but the state was not particularly sympathetic. Misappropriation of HOA funds was taken seriously, especially combined with the reckless endangerment aspect of the wilderness hike incident. While they could not charge her criminally for the hike itself, it spoke to a pattern of poor judgment and disregard for others. In September, Margaret pleaded no contest to theft in the third degree, a reduced charge. She was sentenced to 2 years probation, ordered to pay full restitution to the HOA, and required to perform 200 hours of community service. She was also banned from serving in any HOA leadership position in Alaska for 5 years. The judge, a no-nonsense woman named Patricia Moore, had some pointed words during sentencing. "You were given a position of trust in your community," Judge Moore said. "Instead of serving your neighbors, you abused your authority for personal benefit and ego. You punished a man for volunteering his time and then sued him when he stopped. You took residents and guests into dangerous conditions without proper preparation. You stole money that your neighbors had entrusted to you. This court finds your conduct reprehensible." Margaret sold her house in October and moved back to Seattle. Nobody in the neighborhood was sad to see her go. With the legal mess resolved, I got back to maintaining the trails. I spent most of October and November doing repair work, replacing markers, clearing deadfall, and generally getting everything back in good shape. It felt good to be out there again, doing work I loved without looking over my shoulder for someone with a clipboard and a fine notice. The first snow came in mid-November, and I was ready. I spent a long morning packing trails with my Snowmachine, dragging my equipment behind me at 6 in the morning, making exactly as much noise as I needed to do the job right. Nobody complained. Pete came out with his dog team that afternoon, running them on the freshly packed trails. He stopped by my place on his way home. "Trails are perfect," he said. "Good to have you back out there, Isaac." "Good to be back," I said. By December, everything had settled into a new normal. Tom had been elected as the permanent HOA president, running unopposed. The HOA had adopted a new policy that specifically protected volunteer work from noise ordinance restrictions. Property values in Birchwood Estates started recovering as the negative publicity faded, and people saw the community was under better management. The trails were busier than ever. The Johnson kids were out there every weekend. Pete ran his dogs regularly. Even some new residents who had moved in after Margaret left became regular trail users. A couple of them joined me for maintenance work, learning how to properly pack and maintain winter trails. On Christmas Eve, Sandra Johnson knocked on my door holding a plate of cookies and a card. "These are from all of us," she said. gesturing vaguely toward the neighborhood. "Just to thank you for everything you do." I opened the card later. Inside were signatures from 38 of the 40 households in Birchwood Estates, along with messages of thanks and appreciation. Someone had written "Best Neighbor Ever" in large letters across the top. It was corny and sentimental, and I loved it. The legal bills were paid. The trails were maintained. Margaret was gone. Justice, in its slow and imperfect way, had been served. More importantly, the community had learned something about appreciating the people who contribute to making it a good place to live. I still get out there most mornings with my snow machine, packing trails and checking markers. The $5,000 annual contract covers fuel and equipment maintenance with a little left over. But honestly, I would probably do it for free again. Not because I am a saint or because I enjoy being taken advantage of, but because being out there in the quiet morning hours, creating something useful and beautiful, is its own reward. The difference now is that people understand and value that work. They wave when they see me. They thank me when they use the trails. They respect what it takes to maintain something good for everyone. And that makes all the difference. In January, almost exactly a year after Margaret first showed up at my door with her clipboard, I was out doing morning maintenance. The sun was just starting to come up, painting the snow pink and gold. My snow machine hummed along, dragging the equipment behind me, making the noise that was apparently so offensive to Margaret's delicate sensibilities. A moose and her calf crossed the trail ahead of me. I stopped to let them pass, sitting there in the cold morning air, watching them move through the deep snow with that clumsy grace that moose have. This was why I lived here. This was what it was all about. By mid-February, the anniversary of the HOA meeting where Margaret had dismissed all my neighbors' support, Tom organized a community appreciation event. They called it the Winter Trails Festival and held it on a Saturday afternoon. There were families skiing, kids sledding, Pete doing dog sled rides, and even a few people who brought their own snow machines to ride the trails. Tom made a short speech thanking everyone who contributed to the community, with special mention of the trail system. He presented me with a wooden sign that read "Anderson Trail System," with the Birchwood Estates logo carved into it. "We want to make it official," Tom said. "These trails are a community asset, and you are the reason they exist. This is just a small way of saying thank you." They installed the sign at the main trailhead. I will admit, seeing my name up there made me feel proud. Not because I needed recognition, but because it represented the community choosing to acknowledge and value volunteer work rather than punish it. The festival became an annual tradition. Planning started for the next year's event, with ideas for expanding the trails, adding some warming shelters at key points, and maybe even connecting to some of the state trail systems further north. In March, I got an email from the Eagle River Chamber of Commerce. They wanted to feature the Birchwood Estates trail system in their outdoor recreation guide. They sent a photographer out, and I spent an afternoon showing him the trails, explaining the maintenance process, and talking about why these kinds of community resources matter. The article came out in April, almost exactly a year after Margaret's disastrous wilderness hike. The headline was "Community Volunteer Creates World-Class Trail System in Eagle River." They quoted several neighbors, including Pete and Sandra, about the value of the trails. There was even a sidebar about the importance of supporting volunteer efforts in communities. No mention of Margaret, the lawsuit, or the drama. Just a positive story about someone doing good work and a community that appreciated it. That felt like the right ending to the whole mess. But life is not a story with neat endings. Things kept happening as they do. In May, I was approached by the Chugach State Park Rangers about potentially connecting my trail system to some of the official state trails. It would require some surveying, environmental impact assessments, and a lot of bureaucratic paperwork, but it could open up dozens of additional miles of trails for everyone to use. "You have done impressive work here," Ranger Jennifer Wells told me during a site visit. "The state could learn a lot from how you have managed this system. Low impact, sustainable, community-focused. That is exactly how we want people to interact with Alaska wilderness." We started the process of working through the requirements. It would take years, probably, but the idea of creating something even bigger and more accessible was exciting. In June, I hired my first helper, a young guy named Danny from the neighborhood who had just graduated high school and was taking a gap year before college. He wanted to learn trail maintenance and outdoor skills. I paid him out of the HOA contract money, teaching him everything I knew about reading terrain, maintaining equipment, and respecting the wilderness. "Why do you do this?" Danny asked me one morning while we were replacing some damaged trail markers. "Because somebody has to," I said. "And because when you create something good, something that helps people, that is worth doing." "Even after all the trouble with that HOA lady, especially after that," I said. "She tried to make me stop doing something good because it inconvenienced her. If I had let her win, if I had just quit and walked away, then she would have been right. The work would not have been worth doing. But look around. Look at all the people using these trails. That is proof she was wrong." Danny thought about that while we worked. "So you stopped maintaining the trails to prove a point?" "I stopped maintaining them because I was not going to pay fines for volunteering my time," I corrected. "There is a difference between being petty and standing up for yourself. If someone punishes you for doing good work, the answer is not to keep letting them punish you. Sometimes you have to let things fall apart to show people what they had. And when they got lost, that was just bad luck." "That was Margaret's bad luck," I said. "She knew the trails were not maintained. People had told her. She went out there anyway because her ego was more important than safety. That is not on me. That is on her." It was a hard lesson, maybe, but an important one. You cannot let people abuse you just because you are doing good work. Sometimes you have to protect yourself, even if it means other people face consequences. By July, the trail system was better than it had ever been. With Danny helping and the official HOA support, we had expanded the marked trails, added several new loops, and installed distance markers every half-mile. We had built 2 small warming shelters with donated materials, just simple structures with benches where people could rest and get out of the wind. Usage was way up. On any given weekend, we would see 30 to 40 people using the trails. Not just from Birchwood Estates, but from all over Eagle River and even some folks driving up from Anchorage. It had become a real community resource, exactly what I had always hoped it would be. In August, we held a work party to do some summer maintenance, clearing brush and repairing trail surfaces. 23 people showed up, including families with kids. We spent the day working together and afterward had a potluck picnic at the trailhead. That sense of community ownership, of everyone contributing to something bigger than themselves, was exactly what Margaret had tried to crush with her noise complaints and fines. Looking back on the whole saga, from that first morning when Margaret showed up with her clipboard to standing at the picnic with my neighbors, I realized something important. The trail system was not just about having nice paths through the woods. It was about building community, about people coming together around shared values and shared spaces. Margaret had seen the HOA presidency as a way to impose control, to make people follow rules for the sake of rules. She had viewed my trail work as a violation of her authority. In her mind, the worst thing was not that trails were unsafe or that people were unhappy. The worst thing was that someone was doing something without her permission. That kind of thinking destroys communities. It turns neighbors into adversaries. It makes people afraid to contribute because any contribution might be seen as stepping out of line. The lawsuit, as awful as it was while it was happening, had actually saved the community. It had forced people to choose what kind of neighborhood they wanted to live in. Did they want a place where volunteers were punished and petty rules were more important than people? Or did they want a place where people worked together and supported each other? They had chosen the latter, and that choice had made all the difference. September brought the first light snows, and I started getting the winter equipment ready. Danny was heading off to college in Washington, but he promised to come back during breaks to help with maintenance. I had already lined up another helper for the winter, Pete's nephew who was interested in learning outdoor skills. The cycle continued. Snow would fall, I would maintain the trails, people would use them and appreciate them. It was simple, good work, and it felt right. On September 28th, I got a letter from Margaret's lawyer. My first thought was that she was trying to sue me again, but it was not that. It was a personal letter that her lawyer had been asked to forward. In it, Margaret apologized. She said she had spent the past months in therapy, working through what her therapist called control issues and narcissistic tendencies. She acknowledged that her behavior had been wrong, that she had let her need for authority override common sense and basic decency. She said she understood why I had stopped maintaining the trails and that she did not blame me for what had happened during the hike. I made my own choices, she wrote. I knew the trails were not maintained. I went anyway because I did not want to admit I had been wrong. That is not your fault. That is mine. I am sorry for the trouble I caused you and the community. It was not a perfect apology. It did not undo the stress and legal fees and all the drama, but it was something. It was acknowledgement and accountability, which was more than I had expected to ever get from her. I wrote back, a short note saying I appreciated the apology and hoped she was doing well in Seattle. I did not forgive her exactly, but I did not hold a grudge either. Life was too short to stay angry at someone who was already gone and facing their own consequences. October and November passed in a blur of preparation for winter. First snow that stuck came on November 12th, and I was out there the next morning, packing trails and checking all the systems. Everything was ready. The winter of 2024 to 2025 was one of the best on record for the trails. We had consistent snow, not too much at once, and plenty of cold, clear days perfect for outdoor recreation. The trails were busy constantly. I started keeping a log book at the main trailhead where people could sign in and leave comments. By December, we had hundreds of entries. Best trails in Eagle River, someone wrote. Thank you for maintaining these beautiful paths, another entry said. My kids love skiing here every weekend. Grateful for all your work. Page after page of appreciation and thanks. It was humbling and gratifying in equal measure. Christmas came again, my 7th in this house, my 2nd since the Margaret drama. The neighborhood was peaceful, snow-covered, beautiful. The trails were perfect, winding through the wilderness like white ribbons. People were out there every day, experiencing the Alaska that had drawn them here in the first place. I stood at my back window on Christmas morning, drinking coffee and watching the sun rise over the mountains. A family was already out on the trails, 2 kids on skis being taught by their parents. Their laughter carried across the snow, clear and bright in the cold air. This was what it was all about. Not the conflict or the drama or the vindication of being right. Just people enjoying something good, something that existed because someone had taken the time and effort to create it. The HOA, under Tom's leadership, continued to function the way it was supposed to. They maintained common areas, organized community events, and stayed out of people's way. The noise ordinance was still technically on the books, but it was enforced reasonably, only for actual problems like someone running power tools at midnight. Property values recovered, and then exceeded their previous highs. Birchwood Estates developed a reputation as a well-managed community with great outdoor amenities. Houses sold quickly when they came on the market, often to young families looking for that Alaska lifestyle. In January 2025, exactly 2 years after Margaret first found me, the HOA held a special meeting. Tom announced that they wanted to establish an annual award called the Community Volunteer Award to recognize people who contributed to making Birchwood Estates a great place to live. Isaac will be our first recipient, Tom said, but we hope this becomes a tradition, recognizing the people who make this community work through their time, effort, and dedication. They gave me a plaque, which was nice, but more importantly, they established a principle. Volunteers should be celebrated, not punished. People who contribute should be supported, not fined. It was a small thing, but it meant the lesson had been learned. As winter progressed into February and March, I kept up my routine. Early morning maintenance runs, equipment checks, trail monitoring. Danny came back during his spring break and helped with some repairs. Pete's nephew was doing great, learning the work and taking pride in it. The trails were no longer just my project. They had become truly community-owned, with multiple people learning the skills to maintain them and a system in place to ensure they would continue long after I was gone. That was legacy, real and meaningful. In late March, Ranger Wells contacted me with good news. The environmental assessment for connecting to the state trails had been approved. We could start the actual work of extending and linking the trail systems that summer. It would be a big project, but we had volunteers ready and a small grant from the state to help cover materials. This is going to open up an incredible resource, Jennifer told me. 30 additional miles of maintained trails, all accessible from your neighborhood. It is going to be amazing. Work began in April. We had volunteers from all over Eagle River showing up to help, not just from Birchwood Estates. People had heard about the trail system and wanted to be part of expanding it. We had engineers and surveyors volunteering their expertise, local businesses donating materials, and even some state workers helping out on their days off. It was beautiful to see what could happen when people came together around something positive. No fines, no complaints, no Margaret with her clipboard. Just people working toward a common goal because they believed it was worth doing. By May, we had completed the first connection to the state trail system. We held a ribbon-cutting ceremony with the mayor of Eagle River in attendance, along with state officials and probably 100 community members. The local news covered it, interviewing me and several other volunteers about the project. "What drives you to do this work?" the reporter asked me. I thought about the question. I thought about Margaret and the fines and the lawsuit. I thought about getting lost in the woods and the arrest and the vindication. I thought about all the mornings on my Snowmachine, all the hours of work, all the thank you notes and signed petitions and community support. I do it because it matters, I said simply. Because when you create something good, something that helps people and brings them together, that is the best thing you can do with your time. And because somebody has to. That evening, after the ceremony and the crowds and the celebration, I went out on the trails alone. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The snow was finally melting, revealing the ground beneath, but the trails were still passable. Birds were singing, returning from their winter migrations. Spring was coming. I stood at the junction where my original trails met the new state system connection. Behind me, 5 years of work and nearly losing it all. Ahead of me, 30 new miles of trails and possibilities. In the present moment, peace and satisfaction. Margaret had tried to stop this. She had fined me, sued me, and made my life miserable because she valued rules over people and control over community. But she had failed. The trails existed better than ever. The community was stronger. And the lesson was learned: you cannot punish people for doing good work. You cannot fine someone for making your neighborhood better. And if you try, if you abuse your authority and hurt people who are just trying to help, eventually there will be consequences. Not because of revenge or spite, but because communities recognize what they have when it is gone. Because people value those who contribute. Because in the end, good work and good faith win out over petty tyranny. I had learned something too through all of this. I had learned that sometimes you have to let things fail to show people their value. That standing up for yourself is not selfish, it is necessary. That boundaries matter, even when you are volunteering. Especially when you are volunteering. I had learned that a community gets the leadership it demands. When people like Margaret take over, when they start making rules for the sake of rules and punishing volunteers for minor infractions, the community has to decide what it wants to be. Birchwood Estates had made that decision, and they had chosen well. Most importantly, I had learned that doing good work is its own reward, but being appreciated for it makes everything better. You should not need recognition or thanks to do the right thing, but receiving them reminds you why the work matters. As I walked back toward my house in the fading light, I passed the Johnsons teaching their kids to identify animal tracks. I passed Pete working with a new sled dog, training it on the trails. I passed a couple I did not recognize, newcomers to the neighborhood, holding hands and watching the sunset from the trail overlook. All of this existed because someone had decided to do the work. Because I had decided to do the work, and then decided it was worth defending when someone tried to stop it. That was enough. That would always be enough. The story could have ended differently. If I had backed down when Margaret first fined me, if I had just paid up and kept quiet, maybe she would still be HOA president. Maybe she would have found other volunteers to punish, other people to control. Maybe the trails would still exist, but the community would be smaller, meaner, more afraid. Or if I had fought back with anger instead of boundaries, if I had sabotaged Margaret's hike or actively tried to get her in trouble, maybe I would have been the villain instead of her. Maybe the community would have turned against me instead of supporting me, but I had done neither. I had simply stopped providing a service that was being punished. I had let the natural consequences of her actions play out. And when those consequences came, when people got lost because the trails were not maintained, I had helped with the rescue without smugness or satisfaction. I had just done what needed to be done. That was the key to all of it, really. Doing what needed to be done. Maintaining trails because they needed maintaining. Stopping when it became harmful to continue. Helping with the search because people needed help. Fighting the lawsuit because standing up for yourself is important. Accepting the apology because holding grudges hurts you more than them. Just doing what needed to be done, one step at a time, one decision at a time, until somehow you looked back and realized you had built something that mattered. I reached my house and looked back at the trails one more time. The sign with my name on it stood at the trailhead, illuminated by the last rays of sunlight. Anderson Trail System, it read, in carved wooden letters that would last for years. That was legacy. That was success. Not money or recognition or winning a lawsuit, but creating something good that would outlast the drama and the conflict and all the petty nonsense that Margaret had brought into our lives. The trails would be here long after I was gone. Other people would maintain them, expand them, use them. Kids who were not even born yet would learn to ski on them. Families would make memories on them. And maybe, somewhere down the line, someone would ask who Anderson was and why the trails had his name, and someone would tell them the story, not about fines and lawsuits and getting lost in the woods. Just about a guy who saw something that needed doing and did it, year after year, early morning after early morning, because it mattered. That was the story I wanted told. That was the story worth living. I went inside, made dinner, and settled in for the evening. Outside, the last light faded from the sky. The trails lay quiet under the stars, waiting for tomorrow's adventures. And in the morning, I would be out there again, doing the work, maintaining what I had built, protecting what the community had fought for. Because somebody has to. And that somebody might as well be me.